Hello there, YouTube. It's been a while, hasn't it? Yeah. I last made a video a few weeks ago now. One of the problems I've been having is that my health has decided it just didn't like me this month. So I've been having migraines. I've been having a lot of stomach problems, and I've actually had to go in for some tests for liver function recently. So I've been in and out of clinics and seeing doctors and all that for a few days now to try and get that all sorted. It's kind of slowed my my progress doing pretty much anything on YouTube. Now, if I have a little look, my last video went up, according to this, 2 weeks ago, but I think it's actually close to 3 weeks ago. Published 1st of October, so actually, yeah, not too long ago, 17 days, but even still. That's a long time in internet land. And I haven't put up a proper wrap-up since the 26th of September. So, yeah, you'd think I'd have a lot to talk about, because that means that I missed the 3rd of October and the 10th of October. So this is 3 weeks since my last wrap-up. And in that time, I have read almost nothing. In 3 weeks, I've barely touched a book, I'll be honest. I read a little bit of some non-fiction. There is one book, in fact I'm going to go and get it. There is one book that I did read, which is Unmasked. This is a really, really good non-fiction that I strongly suggest people check out. It goes into depth as to the issues with Antifa, which is something I've discussed in the past. I don't normally talk about non-fiction on this channel, because I tend to think of it as something separate. But given that my last couple of videos have been somewhat political, I'm not going to shy away from discussing political non-fiction. And this is a book that many people need to read, because Andy No has gone into like Antifa rallies and things like this, and actually spoken to these people, and because of the journalism he attempted to do, he has made himself an enemy, and he has been attacked and hospitalised by these people repeatedly on multiple occasions. So you really do owe it to him to actually read his book, because he's one of the few people still doing actual journalism today. Actually going in and getting a first-hand source so that he can say what these groups are doing, what these groups are intending. He can actually say, I witnessed this firsthand, this is the account. Very few journalists do that nowadays, and a lot of people who claim to be journalists aren't journalists. They're just regurgitating posts from other websites that they found. That's not journalism, that's just social media. So, yeah, I highly, highly recommend this book. But other than that, the only other book that I've actually had any time reading is Revival by Stephen King. And this was a nice read. I really enjoyed getting to grips with Stephen King's writing again. This is marked improvement on Elevation. I'm going to review it, so I'm not going to talk about it in depth here. But it was a far, far better experience. It actually has Stephen King's old style of writing, where he explores the childhood of characters in a way that only Stephen King seems to be able to do properly. He writes children in a way that makes you believe. Makes you believe that they're children. It's very clear that Stephen King's history with drugs influenced this one, because his depiction of drug addiction is sickeningly real. But other than that, I'm not going to go into any depth, because I'm going to save that for the review, because I've got a fair bit to talk about on this one, because this is more of a contemporary book than I'm used to. I tend to read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, so this has a lot more contemporary elements that I would like to discuss, and I think it's a good springboard for discussing other contemporary things in books. Outside of what I've been reading, I do have a relatively small book haul. By book haul, I mean I bought some books. But apparently they don't count unless you show them at a camera. That's what haul means now. So we're going to haul the books. Here's me grabbing them to drag them. Okay, so I really hate the term book haul, if you haven't guessed. I have been tentatively putting myself in a book buying ban. And it's because I own too many books. I don't have any shelf space left. So all the books I'm buying now are just ending up in piles on tables. Or on top of my fridge. Like, I've got a stack of books on top of my fridge now that's just growing, because it's the only place I've got left to put them. So on top of the fridge has now become a de facto bookcase. It's getting silly. But I couldn't not buy these. One book that I bought, and I bought this because I saw some of you guys on the Discord talking about it, and I thought, you know what? I want to be able to get into Book of the New Sun. And it's been one of those intimidating books. And then you guys started talking about Gene Wolfe's other writing, and a couple of you mentioned that you were going to be reading The Fifth Head of Cerberus. So I bought a copy. It's not that big, and this is an anthology collection. It's actually got 3 novellas in it, I believe. The Fifth Head of Cerberus, a story by John V. Marsh and VRT. So, yeah. Apparently, I've also read skip the introduction, because the introduction actually spoils the stories. So don't read the introduction until after you've read the stories. That's something that I read somewhere, I can't remember where, but yeah. So I'm going to skip over the introduction and just go straight into the stories. But that's something that I think will open me up to Gene Wolfe a little bit. But I've also got 3 others. And these I bought just because they were cheap, and I thought, I'm going to have to at least give them a try. I've got another anthology collection, and that is The Devourer Below, which is edited by Charlotte Lewin Wells and has stories by a few different people in. Let's see. We have... it's got to have an index, surely. Okay, we've got Running the Night Whiskey by Evan Dickon. We have Shadows Dancing by Georgina Kamiska. The Hounds Below by Josh Reynolds, Labyrinth by Thomas Parrott, All My Friends Are Monsters by David with an E on the end for some reason. Manor. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Is that still just David? Or David? That could easily be a woman's name, David. But yeah, don't know who that is. The Darkling Woods by Kath Laurier. Professor Warren's Investiture by David Annadale, Sins and the Blood by Thomas Parrott, and Litany of Dreams by Ari Marmel. So, good collection of stories there. Nice collection of short stories. I wanted to try a few different authors. So, yeah, this seemed perfect because it's spooky season, as we know, and I haven't had a chance to read much. Now I'm feeling a bit better. I want to get into some reading. All of these are short stories that are no more than about 50 pages. Like one of them's 47 pages long, and I think that's the longest of them. Yeah, the longest one is 47 pages. So I should be able to get through one of these in a day easily, and that's a story that I can mark off as done, finished, and I can get a few different stories in, because I want to expand the different stories I'm hearing at the moment. You know, get a variety. So that was what inspired me to pick this up. But also, it is set in Arkham Horror, which, for those of you who don't know, Arkham Horror is a collaborative board game loosely based off Lovecraftian myth and Lovecraftian stories. It's one of my favourite board games, and apparently the Arkham Horror license is licensed out quite a bit. So not only do we have The Devourer Below with all these novellas and short stories. I'm not sure whether it's a short story or a novella. I did actually look up the definition of exactly what a novella is once, and I've forgotten it, so I'm going to have to look it up again. But whilst there's also a couple of novels, and I picked them up because They were relatively cheap, and it makes for a nice little collection. So I now have The Last Ritual by S.A. Sidor and Litany of Dreams by Ari Mamel. Now the thing is, this is Litany of Dreams, the novel. Litany of Dreams is in here. So that's going to be interesting. Because in here, Litany of Dreams is only 16 pages long. And this is a full novel. So I'm assuming that this is a novelised version of the same story. So I'll be interested to read this this novel and compare it to the short story. I'm going to read the novel first, and I'm going to skip Litany of Dreams in the Devourer below and see whether or not I prefer the short version or the long version. I think that's going to be a fascinating comparison. Because often I've said the definition of perfection is not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. So is the novel actually better than the short story? Because a lot of Lovecraftian stuff is particularly short, so it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, those are what I've bought there. So I now have an Arkham Horror collection, but again, no shelf to stick them on, sadly. But I do like the Arkham Horror setting. It's a nice setting. I also have some other short stories, because I've collected quite a few short stories recently. On Kindle, I realised that I had like a free month of Kindle Unlimited, and then I went to cancel, so they gave me another free month of Kindle Unlimited. So I have Kindle Unlimited right through to the end of the year, which is great. So I am going to go through, and I still cancelled, because I don't want to pay for it, because I'm not going to use it enough. But I do have, and I'm going to put some pictures up of these, the Kindle Unlimited books, and I have the audio version as well of these available. They're little novellas, all in the same series, the Amazon Original series. There's Randomised by Andy Weir. There is You Have Arrived at Your Destination by Amor Towles. The Kindle Unlimited logo is over the name of the author, which is annoying. The Last Conversation by Paul Tremblay, I think that is. Emergency Skin by N.K. Jemisin. Summer Frost by Blake Crouch. And Arc by Veronica Roth. So that'll give me another big selection of authors where I can get a taste of how their writing style fits, and I can try them all out with relatively short books. So I'm going to read through them. I've got access to the audio, so I may even try listening to them. I'm not usually one for audiobooks, but it's something to give a try to, I suppose. But yeah, what that means is that I have a wide selection now of short media. So I'm going to be able to broaden what I'm reading, because one of the things that annoys me at the moment is how slowly I'm getting from one book to another. So I want to try reading shorter stuff to give myself that variety, and then maybe once my reading speed picks up a bit and my health allows me to do more reading, I'll be able to enjoy more books quicker, because I'll be able to devote more time to them. So that's my aim. Hopefully it'll work, can't say for sure. The only real time sink I've managed to find at the moment, and I knew I was going to, is outside of reading, I've been playing video games. And by video games, I mean one video game, Path of Exile. I mentioned this in my last update. I knew getting my friends to play this game was going to be a time sink. Wow, has it been a time sink. I've probably put about 50 hours into it since the last update, if not more. It's been 3 weeks. We've played it not every night, but I'd say every other night for around 2 to 3 hours at a time. So it's been plenty of time. Like, if we consider, like, I've had 20 odd days. In fact, 21 days since my last update, and I've played it on at least 10 of those days for at least 2 to 3 hours at a time, so probably close to 30 hours into the game, but it feels like so much more. It may even be more than that, because I know I've spent a day or two where we've had a free day and we've played it for 4 or 5 hours straight. But then there's also been a couple of times I've had 2 days where I just didn't switch the PlayStation on. So it swings and roundabouts. Either way, that's been my big time sink. It's pretty much the only thing I've been doing with my free time, if I'm honest. It's given me a chance to chat with some of my friends, because we can chat whilst we're playing, so it's a nice little social activity. And with my health not being the best, it's served as both a hobby and a way of socially interacting. So it's a nice way of doing the two with the same limited time. I've watched the occasional film. We had a bit of a film night last week where a friend came around. We watched a couple of films. There was the film Void, which was Lovecraftian-esque in its design. It was fine for a low budget horror, but we gave it a try. And then we went on and watched Joe's Apartment because we fancied something a bit comedy-esque that we could watch it just in the background while we chatted, and that was fun. Some good old-fashioned 90s comedy, just to lighten the mood after that horror. Other than that, I've not really had much time to watch other films. I've watched a little bit documentary-wise, and I've been researching, in my spare time, I've been researching medieval weaponry and medieval history from the 15th century, because one of the things that I was hoping to make videos on in the future is I want to talk about fantasy and its tendency to lean into medieval. It's becoming more realistic, fantasy in general, and it's becoming more focused on the medieval period. But there's also slight switches towards a flintlock fantasy and a steampunk turn that's happening at the moment. At least on BookTube, people are moving more towards those kinds of books, which is good because I like those things. I would say Renaissance era is becoming the next big thing, or at least it's soon to become the next big thing, as I suspect there's going to be more focus on it. But I also think that there's a misinterpretation of the medieval period. A lot of people portray the medieval period in a way that isn't accurate. You'll find knights and longbowmen and things like that coexisting in the same place as people with 15th century halberds, and they'll be fighting alongside people that are wearing Gothic field plates and things like that. And it's like, sure, that did happen, but only for a very, very small amount of time. But at the same time, they won't have any guns present. I'm like, if you've got 15th century halberds and Gothic field plate, then you should have mortar crews and cannons and musketeers on the battlefield as well, because they were present at the same time. You'll have people fighting with greatswords. Now, greatswords were, again, a largely 15th century thing. Like a proper, Flamberge or Zweihander, we're looking at late 14th, 15th century for their main adoption. They were largely 15th century, which means they were predominantly being used to combat polearms. That, the whole point was that you would go in swinging this giant sword around and you would knock everything aside, which means you could get in close and you could harry so many people. So you could break up formations of polearms, which means they only really came into great use when people were fighting against halberds and other troops like that. And when halberds were big in the late 15th century, we're talking after 1540, the musket was also big. The musket became a staple in European combat from about 1540 onwards. So, I think that the presentation of medieval combat is misinterpreted by a lot of fantasy and even a lot of realistic interpretations of it. So they'll often put polearms and greatswords, things like that, in alongside Vikings, and that just doesn't happen. Like when the Vikings were fighting, you had sword and shield. You didn't have any two-handed swords, not even long swords. They just didn't happen. The only two-handed weapons you really had were the Daneaxe, and even then, only in the late periods. The Daneaxe only really came in about the 9th century, and the Vikings were going from the 6th century onwards. So it's only after about the 9th century we really saw signs of the Daneaxe. We had the Hewling spear, which was basically a glaive. It's just a double-ended. It was just a double-sided glaive, really, if we're honest. They call it a spear because it tapered and had a stabbing point, but so does a glaive, really. So I would argue a Hewling spear and a glaive are pretty much the same thing. It's just the glaive was more like a sword blade on the end of a pole rather than a elongated spear head with a sharpened edge. But they functionally did the same job. But that was the only polearm they had, Hewling spear. And it was considered to just be an oversized spearhead. Other than that, the first real polearms, you're looking 13th century before the billhook and the all-pike became a big thing, and the great mace, which or two-handed mace. There was a few kinds like the planken and the Gottentag. They're often completely forgotten. They were one of the most popular polearms from about the 13th century onwards. Things like the halberds didn't show up until about the 15th. So it's interesting. Like the medieval period's often from like the 5th century to the 15th century, but some of the iconic weapons of the medieval period only existed for the last 100 years, and at the same time that they existed, so did muskets. So if we count the halberd, like the medieval halberd, as a medieval weapon, we should be counting the musket as well. But yeah, I'm going to talk more about this in some other future videos anyway, because I want to talk about a lot of different topics, like topics that are connected but adjacent to the things that I've spoken about so far, because I like to talk about books, I want to talk about role-playing games and the likes of D&D. I like talking about video games, and fantasy as a genre intertwines all of those. So I want to also talk about things like medieval weaponry, medieval battles, and medieval life, and living history, that kind of thing. So what would have been authentic history for the medieval period, and how to portray that in fantasy fiction. So it's all stuff that I'm interested in. It's all interconnected very, very loosely. At the same time, I do want to go into other areas. I'd like to talk more about the games industry. I'm going to record something in a bit where I talk about that, because I haven't put up a gaming video in a long time, and I've realised why. So I'm going to put a video up soon about that. But I've been rambling for a while now, so I'm going to leave that here. That's my wrap up for October 16th, is it? Or 17th? Let me check. I think it's 17th, isn't it, today? It is, yes, October 17th. So that is my wrap up for October 17th. And hopefully it's been interesting. I'm going to try and read some of these short stories, so I've got plenty to talk about in the coming weeks, because I want to really get into it, but my health has really been letting me down. I'll also put a bit of an update in my next wrap-up on what the health situation is, because, like I say, I was at the clinic, and I haven't got the results back, so I don't know what's up at the moment. It's still a hard thing for me to come to terms with, because I don't know exactly what's up, but I know what the possibilities are, and they're not good. So, wish me luck there, and I'll see you guys sometime soon. Until then, bye.